Before we begin, we want to thank the author for sharing their story with us. If you have any truly spooky, creepy, or supernatural experiences that fit our channel's theme, we ask you to please send them to us through email. The first half of my second year at university was almost finished, and it was definitely the weirdest semester I ever had. Many of my friends from last year didn't come back this time, and to make things more awkward, my roommate was a bit strange. At first, he seemed a bit rude and different, but once you got to know him, he was actually a nice person. Henry sometimes had trouble controlling his anger, but luckily, it didn't happen much during the school year. By the end of the semester, we became good friends, and since I was driving home for winter break, we decided to go on a road trip together. I lived in Texas back then, so the drive to Kentucky was going to be really long for me. But since Henry, my roommate, lived there, I was happy to give him a ride. It meant having a driving buddy for part of my trip. At the beginning, everything was going smoothly. We listened to music, stopped for fast food and coffee when we needed, and had a great time chatting with each other. But then Henry received a text from his girlfriend, who also went to university with us. The way Henry reacted to the text made me realize something was wrong. It seemed like she had just broken up with him, and he was really upset. He started complaining about what a terrible decision it was for her to end things, and he even wanted to use my phone to text her while pretending to be me. I immediately told him that it was not a healthy idea and I wouldn't be a part of it. He needed to deal with the situation on his own. Henry didn't like my response and started getting louder as he talked to me. I advised him to calm down and suggested that he could call her once he got home. I assured him that things would work out as they were meant to. Somehow, he got the idea that he should go to her house. But there were two big problems with that plan. First, it was really creepy and not okay to do, and the girl lived all the way back in New York, which posed the second problem. I will always remember the look in his eyes when he asked me if we could turn the car around and go back to New York so he could tell her in person about her mistakes, in his own words. Of course, my answer was a definite no. He started yelling at me again, which I expected. However, what happened next caught me off guard. Henry's face turned red, and he started screaming at the top of his lungs about how terrible everyone is and how he should be able to take what he wants. It was at that moment that Henry took out a bright yellow box cutter from his pocket. His face seemed to calm down, and he looked expressionless as he pressed the closed box cutter against my side and demanded that I stop the car. I had never seen Henry like this before, so I didn't question him and did as he said. I pulled over to the side of the road, and he forcefully made me get out of the car. Then he quickly jumped into the driver's seat. Henry seemed completely out of his right mind. Unaware that my cell phone was still in my pocket, and not knowing if he would harm anyone, I decided to call the police and report my car as stolen. I explained everything to the emergency dispatcher, and as Henry drove into Pennsylvania, he was eventually arrested by the highway patrol. They spotted my car and pulled him over safely, ensuring that no one got hurt. It is essential to prioritize your safety and well-being in any situation. If you ever find yourself in a dangerous or threatening situation, remember to prioritize your own safety and reach out for help. Trust your instincts and seek assistance from authorities or trusted individuals. Your well-being matters, and there are people who are ready to support you. I'll never forget the summer when I finally finished college, although it didn't turn out as I had hoped. Before starting my job, I had saved up enough money to plan a road trip that would last for about 3.5 weeks during the summer. My plan was to drive along the East Coast from Long Island to Florida, stopping at various places along the way for a day or two. But my main destination was Florida and intended to spend 2 weeks at the beach there, and then drive back, making a few more stops on the return journey. It was going to be an amazing road trip, and it was, at least until the drive back home. The trouble began on my last day in Florida as I decided to spend my final few hours by the water, and then around 4 p.m., I would start my drive back home. But surprisingly, everything was going according to plan. The weather was fantastic, and the beach was not as crowded as it had been before. I spent about an hour near the water and then went back to my towel to dry myself off. When it was time to leave, I reached into my bag to get my car keys and wallet, but to my surprise, I couldn't find my wallet anywhere. As soon as I realized it was missing, I started searching the sand around my towel, but I couldn't see it anywhere. The only thing I could think of, and what I really hoped for, was that I had left it in my car. Maybe it fell out of my bag or something. So I quickly gathered my things and went to my car, hoping that my wallet would be inside. I kept my fingers crossed the whole way, just hoping for the best. But turns out, it wasn't necessary though, because as I was walking toward my car, I was flagged down by a tall, brown-haired man with large glasses that made his eyes look magnified. The man ran up to me, and he was holding something in his hand that I recognized as my wallet, and as he handed it back to me, he claimed that he found it in the sand and he had been looking for its owner. It seemed a little odd, but after inspecting my wallet and seeing that everything was still there, I just passed it off as him being a good Samaritan. I thanked the man and offered him a couple bucks for his trouble, but he declined, and after a very brief conversation, we parted ways. As soon as my wallet was back in my bag, I began walking toward my car and started my journey back home. The plan was for me to drive through Florida and into Georgia before stopping for the night, and honestly, I'm surprised I made it out of Florida before midnight because of how thick the traffic was at some points. The only good thing about the traffic was that it gave me a clear look at my surroundings, and I'll be honest, I almost freaked out at one point. I was sitting in a line of cars, waiting for a traffic light to change from red to green at an intersection. While looking around and checking my rearview mirror, I noticed someone in the car behind me who seemed familiar. It looked like the person who had returned my wallet earlier. For a moment, I felt worried because I had been driving for an hour and a half, and I couldn't understand why he would be following me. However, when the light turned green and I started driving ahead, I thought it might have been just a coincidence. Maybe the person behind me simply looked similar to the man I had met earlier that day. So I kept driving without any issues and eventually reached Georgia. It was around midnight when I decided to find a motel to stay for the night. I wasn't too particular about the rooms, so I chose the first one I saw a sign for. Luckily, they had available rooms. I checked in quickly and headed towards my room. However, at that moment, a strong sense of something being seriously wrong started creeping in. I walked up the outside staircase to the second floor where my room was located. I found the right room and entered, promptly locking the door behind me. I tried to ignore the uneasy feeling that someone might be following me. After about an hour of being in the room, I started to feel tired and finally decided to get some rest. Before going to bed, I made the decision to look out the window to make sure that my car was still there. That was always a huge fear of mine, that I would get stranded somewhere after having my car stolen. When I looked out of the window, I was not only surprised, but terrified. Standing near my car and looking through the back windows was someone who I undoubtedly recognized as the man I had met at the beach in Florida. I quickly stepped away from the window and hoped that he hadn't seen me, and stepped over to the phone that was in the room so I could call the police. I informed them that I was being stalked, and I needed help as soon as they could get here. To my surprise, 2 police officers were at my door within a few minutes, and I explained to them what had happened. They went and spoke to the woman at the front desk and found out that the man had rented a room for the night. At first, they planned to simply talk to him, and it honestly seemed like they thought I was over-exaggerating. However, their mood changed once they ran his information, and found out that the man had a warrant out for his arrest and had allegedly been involved in another missing person case. The police apprehended the man, and since I certainly wasn't getting any sleep that night, I ended up checking out of my room and driving through the rest of the night. The scariest moment of my life happened after one of the best trips I ever had in California. I was 21 years old and decided to visit a friend who was studying in California. It was an amazing experience, very different from what I was used to in Tennessee, and I was sad when it was time to leave. I had spent about a week with my friend, enjoying our time together on the boardwalk. Eventually, the time came for me to go back home. My plan was to break up the drive into 4 days, hoping to be back home by the afternoon of the second day. However, things didn't go as planned, and my trip took longer because I had a near-death experience. The first part of my drive was uneventful. I drove from California through Nevada and then went down to Arizona, where I stayed at a hotel for the night. The next day is when things started going wrong. I began that part of the drive early in the morning, feeling pretty good. But then I heard a terrible sound, the sound of a flat tire. I could also feel that the car was driving differently. I pulled over to the side of the road, hoping that I had a spare tire in the car. Luckily, there was a small spare tire called a donut under the trunk of the car. Now, anyone who knows about tires will tell you that you shouldn't drive too far on a donut. So my plan was to put on the spare tire temporarily until I could get to an auto shop and buy a new one. Sometimes things don't go as we plan. As I followed the directions on my GPS and entered Texas, I noticed a bridge up ahead. It was around noon and the road was unexpectedly crowded. I was driving at a speed of about 40 to 50 miles per hour as I approached the relatively narrow bridge. The guardrails on the bridge looked old and hadn't been taken care of or replaced for a long time. I should mention that I was already a bit nervous when driving over bridges, but this one made me extremely anxious. When I was about halfway across the bridge, I heard a loud and terrifying banging noise. It happened when my car hit a small hole in the road. The spare tire I had put on my car didn't just deflate, it actually burst. The pressure from the explosion caused the passenger side of my car to lift off the ground a bit before dropping back down onto the exposed rim. It was at this point that I lost control of the car, and it began pulling to the right as I panicked. The passenger side of my car impacted with the rusted guardrail and blasted through it. Thankfully, the rest of the guardrail held up, and the majority of my car remained on the bridge. Only the front passenger side tire was hanging off, though that didn't make me feel much better. I opened my door as quickly as I could and stepped out onto the bridge as cars continued to pass by going the opposite way. I called my insurance company and the authorities, who had to shut the bridge down for 2 hours until a tow company could come and pull my car out of the way. While I was waiting, I happened to glance over the side of the bridge. If my car hadn't been stopped, I would have fallen about 35 feet, or even more, into the river below.